to the Lake Bluff Board of Trustees meeting. It's July 8th, 2019. And could we have a roll call, please?
Trustee Grenier.
Here.
Trustee Markey.
Here.
Trustee Meyer.
Here.
Trustee Toll.
Here.
Would everybody please stand for the pledge? This thing's not working. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we've got consideration of the minutes of the June 24th, 2019 Village Board meeting. Do I have a motion for that?
So moved.
So moved by Mr. Toll. A second, please.
Second.
And second by Ms. Markey. Any corrections, additions to that? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
At this point, the village board allows 15 minutes for anyone in the audience to speak on an item or items that are not on tonight's agenda. Do we have anybody tonight that is clamoring to come up? Okay, guess not. We have a very short agenda, so I don't think we really need to change anything on this meeting. We do have item number 6, which is the warrant report for July 1st through 15th and June 2019 payroll expenditures. Expenditures of village funds for payment of invoices in the amount of $257,240.10 for July 1 through 15. Expenditures of village funds for payroll in the amount of $281,983.04 for June 2019. Which are total expenditures of $539,223.14. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
So moved by Mr. Grenier, and a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Meyer. Any comments or things for our finance director by the board? Hearing none, could we have a roll call, please?
Trustee Grenier.
Aye.
Trustee Markey.
Aye.
Trustee Meyer.
Aye.
Trustee Toll.
Aye.
Okay, at this point, the village administrator, you have a report, and I know you've got the stormwater thing here, and I...
Yeah. Scott, was you going to go on up to the microphone? So, several months ago, the village engaged Christopher Burke Engineering to do a village-wide stormwater analysis of the village's infrastructure. And the study is still in progress, but it's getting close to being completed. And what we wanted to do was to bring in Scott. Scott Griffith is the consultant who's with Christopher Burke. He also happens to be a Lake Bluff resident. So has firsthand experience and visualization of what's been going on in addition to their field work and survey work, which he'll get into as he reviews with you all kind of a status update of the report.
If we can plug it in.
Does the input need to change?
It gets beyond me once it's plugged in.
All right, thank you. All right, good evening. Thanks for having me out. I just wanted to give everyone kind of a quick update on what's been going on with the village-wide stormwater analysis. We've been, as Drew stated earlier, we've been working on this since the end of last year, kind of got a little more involved, and we're planning on wrapping this up within the next few months. So really the goal of the study and what we're trying to do is identify areas susceptible to flooding and develop projects to reduce the risk of future flooding to roads and structures, which is, really all you can ask for in something like this. It's a very well-developed community. We don't have the luxury of open space to provide storage. We don't have the luxury of pushing water downstream as fast as we can, since all of our receiving systems seem to be ravines, and we're going to have to deal with erosion problems in the future. So what I wanted to kind of cover today was our existing village stormwater patterns. If you're not really familiar with how the water flows from, I'm focusing mostly on the east part of town, from Green Bay Road through Lake Michigan. Here's kind of a quick exhibit of our storage area, or our study area that we've been working on. The grayed out area in the bottom right corner kind of shows our study area. The red hashed area, the red hashed area shows what we've done in previous studies. I will be focusing from Green Bay Road to the east. So previous hydrologic and hydraulic studies that we've performed for the village, we sent out flood questionnaires to the residents and received pretty good feedback on via SurveyMonkey online website. Existing conditions analysis on what's kind of driving what areas we're looking at within the village, and then kind of how we're designing these study areas. The city has decent criteria that we like to follow and make sure that we're not causing problems and we're doing the best that we can to keep structures and roads clear. I'm going to identify a few drainage areas. In the future, I think we plan on coming back in September to discuss kind of more specifics on the areas that we've kind of pinpointed, and what kind of improvements and costs and how we can decide what projects to move forward with. And then the village actually has a couple upcoming projects that are starting, I'd say, relatively soon. Within the next couple weeks, I believe, is when 2 stormwater projects that we're involved with are going to get constructed, and then kind of what lies ahead for the future of the stormwater village-wide stormwater study. So as I mentioned before, our study area kind of focuses on the southeast corner of this map. We're covering from Green Bay Road east to the lake, south to the village boundary, and north to Blodgett Avenue. So here's kind of a nice map that kind of shows the existing drainage patterns. As you can see, the red is the high spot within the village, and the blues are the low spots. So we actually are in a unique position. A subcontinental divide exists within our village, which is kind of neat. Everything that falls on west of Green Bay Road will find its way directly to the Mississippi River. Everything that flows east of Lake Michigan will flow its way out towards the St. Lawrence waterway. So it's kind of a neat little area from a hydraulic standpoint. So previous studies, I wanted to talk about that real quick. We performed a study back in 2014, wrapped up in the beginning of 2015. A detailed study of the viaduct. I'm sure we're all familiar with this image. It happens pretty much every time it rains, in excess of just a normal drizzle. It was a detailed study from Scranton Avenue from the Scranton Avenue Viaduct to Green Bay Road. What that analysis really helped us do was to identify some future drainage improvements within the north and east terrace areas, which I'll touch on more. And I kind of make a little note of it right below that, where we use that study to develop the Lincoln Avenue drainage improvement, West Sheridan Place improvements, and then that analysis has actually been expanded to include the village-wide study, so areas east of Sheridan Road towards the lake, and then south towards Bath and Tennis Club. So we sent out flood questionnaires to all of the residents. We reached out and we put a link in the weekly newsletter. We put a link on the village website. The village mailed out information cards to residents to try and get responses. 329 responses were received, which is actually a pretty good showing. We've sent out to villages 6 times the size of this and received a quarter of the responses. So it's just good to know that we're getting feedback. Really, the more information that we can get from the residents, the more knowledge we can actually gain. I live in the community, and the number of times when it starts downpouring and I hop in my car and try and see the flooding, I can't even capture it all in one day. It just, it happens so quick and it recedes relatively quickly, but usually by the time you get to a lot of spots, it's gone and there's nothing to really see. So a couple questions that we had actually asked, and we're really just trying to find information on, 1, the structure, and 2, what kind of flooding are you seeing, and what kind of flooding are you encountering? So about the structure, do you have a basement? Have you done anything as a residential flood control project, such as sanitary sewers, putting in overhead sewers to try and prevent sanitary backup? Do you have an exterior, backflow preventer to where the storm sewers can't surcharge back up into your floor drains or anything like that? Just kind of relative questions like that were ones that we were asking for. So here's some of the responses that we got for homes flooded in the past. About almost a 50% of yes and 50% of no. And then some of the relative questions on things that are happening outside the house. Is there a sewer backup that you're seeing? Is water coming in over land due to inefficient overland flow paths? Are you seeing ponding in the roadways? Is your road becoming impassable? Just questions that help us get an idea that when we kind of look at the overall village analysis, we're able to determine these are kind of pinch points that we're seeing, and these kind of confirm, from the residents what they're seeing when it rains in excess. So what we did was we created kind of a survey response map. We were able to kind of put together all of the responses in a GIS database and post them, generate a map that kind of shows that, all right, where are the problems that we're seeing? What's the kind of problems that we're seeing in those areas? And are these areas that we need to look at a little further? So here's the three main subbasins that kind of drain to the three ravines that go out to Lake Michigan. The North Ravine kind of covers just a little south of Center Street up towards Blodgett. The Central Ravine actually has the largest watersheds, a couple hundred acres of tributary area, drains west to east. This is what is mainly tributary to the Viaduct before discharging under Artesian Park and into that ravine. And then the South Ravine, which is I believe, more of a newer developed area. They have the one Central Ravine that picks up a portion from north of Lake Forest High School, drains up under Sheridan Road, and then kind of east towards the lake. So these are the three watersheds that we found based on the existing storm sewer systems that we were able to kind of divide the community into. So if you could see kind of the black lines that are in the background, you probably saw it better on one of the earlier maps, and we'll see it again in the future. Those are some of the larger, I guess what we call them trunk lines. They're probably 15-inch minimum is what we picked up. There are smaller lines that kind of drain, through low spots, through no low spots, through rear yards that we didn't show on this exhibit, because if we did, it would just be kind of messy, to be honest with you. There would just be a lot to look at and probably cause some confusion. So really, what did we do after we received all of this feedback from the residents? Well, we did the next best thing, and I'm going to wow you with some hydrologic and hydraulic analysis discussion. We built we sent out a field survey crew. You probably saw them and encountered them. They surveyed approximately 300 storm sewers and inlets throughout the community. We developed a hydrologic and hydraulic model of the existing system. So we used data that we obtained from the field survey, data that the village provided us via storm sewer atlas, GIS files, and then just data through Lake County that has topography, aerial imagery, soil maps, just to build a more complex and more detailed model. So to give you an idea, we took those three subbasins and we broke them into 125 smaller subbasins. So this is kind of what the skeleton of the hydraulic model looks like for the village. As you can see, a lot of the orange divides kind of stayed consistent, the outfall stayed consistent, but what we were able to do by building just such a large model is use more of a holistic approach to identifying any sort of problems within the area. And then when we go and work on our alternatives, we're actually able to take a look and say, okay, if we move this drainage, if we fix this drainage issue in East Terrace, is now the viaduct going to have problems? Or are we now causing problems in the ravine by increasing storm water that's going there? So we're able to just view it larger than we are if we just kind of look at a smaller sample and say, yeah, this matches, we assume that there's nothing else. We wanted a better idea, and it's actually a way to feel more comfortable with what's going on and what alternatives we are proposing. What's really nice about this is we are actually able to run just our design storms that in what we see from the Illinois State Water Survey. They provide us with these rainfall data, this rainfall depths that we use to analyze, and then we're actually able to run various storm events that we see. So if we get a chance to come out, so say for example during the July 2017 event, I know it happened a couple years ago, but the event's probably still pretty fresh with a lot of people because that was probably record flooding throughout the county. We were actually able to take the rainfall data that we got from a local rain gauge and run it through the model to see if what results we're getting within our analysis are similar to what's happening in the field. So, when we ran the model and we saw the viaduct was closed for 24, 48 hours, those were similar to the results that we were getting. When we saw flooding, in these areas that never see water ever, those are similar to the results we were getting. So it really just allows us a chance to kind of look at real-world storms rather than just our simple design storms where it assumes that it just peaks out, all the rain falls, and then it peaks back down. So like I said, 125 individual subbasins, 6 acres average area. Some are smaller, some are larger. Typically that southeast corner of the village is were larger basins. There's less storm sewer, more direct runoff directly to the ravines. So we went with larger subbasins there. But if you look over towards the East Terrace area, you're going to see smaller subbasins divided usually by roads, front and rear yards on how water divides. And that's what we were able to determine these divides based on the Lake County aerial topography that we were provided with. So what did we learn? We basically learned what we see in a lot of these communities in the area. This village was developed prior to modern stormwater planning. Lake County's ordinance didn't really come into effect and start taking off until 1992, and by that point, a lot of the village had been developed, obviously. So we're not seeing, there's actual various levels of protection for the existing system. So taking a quick look at things, the viaduct is going to flood if you have a real heavy rainfall that exceeds the 1-year rainfall event. That's just how low, there's inadequate drainage from it. There's a lot of area that drains towards it, and it's very flashy. Where the East Terrace, you can go into some of those areas, and some of the storm sewer systems will provide less than the 5-year. So there's some larger ones, but just based on design storms and what we use to determine those numbers, there's a little bit more protection. But then you can actually go to areas east of Sheridan Road and within the northeast portion of the community, and you actually see that there's almost the 10-year level of protection. So it's not consistent throughout the community, it's very common for these communities that have been developed in the past. We're also able, from our results, we're also able to determine what problem areas we're seeing. And then, what are causing those problems? Isn't it inadequate storm sewer? Is it an impaired overland flow path to where, if this shed wasn't built in this backyard, would water be flowing freely? If this fence wasn't put up and blocking water, would we still be seeing these issues? So we're actually able to see that. Then we were able to take the results of our analysis and compare them to how some of the results looked from with the flood questionnaires and the feedback that we were receiving from that. So here's kind of a quick an image showing our 10-year rainfall event and our 100-year rainfall event in the areas that we were seeing as flooded areas within the community. So the blue is our 10-year, our red is our 100-year. Ideally, our goal is to try and get rid of as much of that 10-year that's sitting on the roadway as possible. So you can see it mostly, it prevails mostly in the East Terrace area. But there are some wetland areas that we're not going to try and fix those because they're supposed to take water. They're supposed to be those natural depression areas. And then you can also see more along Prospect on the east side of town where we're seeing some 10-year within the roadway. So this helped us, identify different areas within the community that we should look at and take a closer look. And everybody knows the viaduct problem. You can see blue and red through there pretty clearly. So we then overlaid it with the results of our flood questionnaires to see, okay, is this what the residents are seeing? Are we seeing a lot of the same results that have been reported? And we're able to kind of pinpoint, the area within East Terrace, for example, where we saw some flooding for both the 10-year and the 100-year, yeah, we did get reports of overland flooding through those areas as identified by the orange box. Or if you go over towards the east part of town, you're able to see that, yeah, someone did report overland flooding. There was some sump pump failure, so that was kind of like an isolated event. But you're able to kind of identify where you're hearing from these residents and what we're able to see. So it shows that our results are going in the right direction, and we feel comfortable designing alternatives to kind of to improve these areas based on the results of our analysis. So what are we really looking to do then? So our future design considerations, I kind of touched on this earlier, is the village has some design requirements that I think are really good for what we have. Like I said, limited area for the construction of storage basins. What the village likes to do is keep 10-year rainfall events off the road, 100-year rainfall events away from the structures. 10-year rainfall event, 10% occurrence chance each year. 100-year, I know we've had about 4 of them in the last 3 years, I'd say. Believe it or not, there's actually only supposed to be 1% chance of that happening in a year. So we're seeing it a little more frequently, which is then leading to this. And this is what we're considering when we start working on the proposed conditions and our alternatives. Illinois State Water Survey is an organization based out of Champaign, Illinois. They kind of do the analysis and relook at rainfall depths after so many years. Well, I think they've been hearing quite a bit from a lot of communities and a lot of regulators that are saying, look, your rainfall depths aren't really aligning with what we're seeing. So they are actually currently being updated. So we are now going to start seeing kind of a skew to where, currently within Lake County, a 10-year, 2-hour rainfall event. So a 10-year storm event that rain falls in about 2 hours is 2.25 inches. Well, what they're looking to improve it or increase it to is 2.99 inches, which you're looking at about a 30% increase. If you look at where 2.99 falls right now, that actually falls between the 25 and the 50-year rainfall event. So that gives you an idea on the level of protection and the skew that it's doing in regards to rainfall depths and how communities and regulators need to kind of adapt and engineers need to design for some of these future increases. Because what's the point of putting a project in the ground right now and designing for standards that are going to be outdated in about 2 months, if that makes sense. 100-year, 3.77 inches for the 2-hour in Lake County. It's moving actually up to 4.97. I didn't even have that number on my chart, so I couldn't really tell you what that falls to, but it's well over the 100. It's probably not that far off from the 250 to 500 range. So that's the kind of skewing that we're seeing. So our drainage improvements that we're looking for is potential drainage improvements based on the results of the analysis, develop and analyze improvements at a conceptual level right now. When we get kind of more into the design and the design and planning phase, where we'll take more, more site-specific survey, and we're able to look and refine our modeling based on what we actually shoot out there with a field crew. That's when you kind of get into the design, you prepare your plans, and then when we're looking at all of our future concepts, we actually are going to be start looking at the new rainfall depths. Like I stated before, we want to be kind of progressive, and we want to make sure that this storm water system is going to function for years to come, and not just for the time being. So, based on our results, this is kind of similar. That's the map that I showed you earlier. We were actually able to identify 6 different study areas. So, study area 1 is over in the East Terrace. Study area 2 is down near Ravine Forest. Study area 3 is over on the east part of town. Study area 4 and 6 is actually the viaduct, and we're looking at a couple different alignments on how to, drain the viaduct. And really that comes down to both constructability, cost, and what we can do to kind of minimize the impact. And then study area 6 is the area kind of in the north center, I guess you could call. We're really looking at just kind of constructing more of a relief sewer through that area to try and pick up, keep the roads clear and keep structures free from damage. So here's how we're going to take a look at some of these alternatives. We're going to analyze. We're going to still go right back to that real fun swim model, which is a stormwater management model. And we're going to just look at both conveyance improvements and, if possible, storage improvements. I mean, if there is land, we may look into doing it, but a lot of the land just doesn't provide the amount of volume that would be necessary to really offset a lot of the storage that would be needed. We're going to identify potential impacts to adjacent properties, kind of like how I mentioned earlier. By looking at it through a whole village-wide study, we just want to make sure that we're not moving the problem on Pine to Rockland. We want to make sure that we're not moving the problem on Rockland to the Viaduct. By looking at it from a village-wide analysis, we're able to see where, are we causing problems somewhere else? Are we creating a new problem that, we wouldn't have known in the past? And then, obviously, what I had just mentioned before, a lot of these projects are going to be designed to meet the village criteria of 10-year off the road and 100-year away from structures. So I wanted to touch on a couple upcoming projects that are going to be starting here within the next couple weeks. They came from the Scranton Avenue Viaduct that was wrapped up in January of 2015. Lincoln Avenue drainage improvements and the West Sheridan Place drainage improvements. Both of these are just the construction of some storm sewers to drain some low spots and keep roads clear, keep structures clean. So here's an upcoming project, Lincoln Avenue, Hancock Avenue, just north of Scranton. I'm sure there's probably quite a few people familiar with the area. This is a very, very low spot. And what ends up happening now is the existing storm sewer, if you could see in the red, picks up this area and actually drains it east through these rear yards before picking up Rockland Avenue and bringing it down into, this is actually IDOT-owned land. What we're looking to do is actually install an entire new pipe with some high-capacity inlets in this low spot to pick up all the runoff that actually comes down Hancock, comes down Lincoln, and run it directly under Scranton to the same ditch that it goes to now. We're just going to discharge it a little further upstream. The second project that there is going to be kicking off here pretty soon is the West Sheridan Place drainage improvements. And there's a few low spots that exist now. There's one right here on the road on Sheridan Place, and then there's actually rear yards that this fills up and is, I believe I don't know if it is drained or it's drained by a very inefficient pipe. So what we're looking to do is actually increase the storm sewer down Sheridan Place, down Lincoln Avenue, and down Park towards Malman Park here, and then discharge it, connect to the existing system and discharge it into the existing flow path. So we're able to kind of look and see, all right, well, if we pick up this water, are we causing any additional issues down here? And based on the timing of how the storm water is running off, we were comfortable and confident that we weren't going to be pushing problems downstream. So what's in the future? Really what we're going to look at doing is identifying some opportunities for village infrastructure projects and residential flood-proofing projects. Really, the most we could do is work with the village to give them ideas and plans and ideas and thoughts on how to kind of improve areas where they can. Obviously, you start working on private property, you're getting into a gray area, and a lot of communities kind of leave that up to the individual homeowners. So that's kind of what we're going to look and see what we can do to kind of do a more regional project rather than smaller projects that just kind of slap a Band-Aid on it, I guess you could call. Next, develop a prioritization matrix to rank project by cost and benefit. This is where we take kind of what we're looking to do, what our alternative is, put together a cost estimate and figure out what kind of benefits we're going to be getting. And by that, we do our best to try and quantify, okay, does it damage a house? How much money are we saving to the homeowner by reducing this flooding risk? And so what we're able to do is, the more houses that we can save by a simple project, that project is obviously going to rank higher than if it's one project and a $800,000 storm sewer line, for example. So these are just kind of ideas on how we look, and we put these. This is kind of how we rank projects and recommend them. And then the big one that's going to kind of continue going is evaluation of Scranton Avenue Viaduct. Keep working with IDOT. I know we've kind of had discussions with them too in the past, and then just kind of look at different storage and conveyance improvement options through the area. Like I said, we're looking at a couple. The original 2015 study looked, I believe, at a third alignment that may or may not be beneficial, but those are kind of that's kind of what we're looking at and for the future. September 2019, we're looking to complete the study itself. By that point, we'll have a report, some exhibits, have a better discussion on what the individual study areas are, and as I mentioned before, we'll put together a prioritization matrix to kind of help the village and give an idea on what kind of benefit there is to the projects that we're proposing. So, if there's any questions, I could take them now, or
No, open to the board for questions?
Did we recently look at, there was a fanciful project a number of years ago of digging a whole new sewer line from there all the way down to the lake?
For
do you
the
remember-
viaduct, to help cure the viaduct?
Cure the viaduct issue, and what was the cost estimate of that?
20 million.
Yeah.
Okay.
And part of this study is to look at that window of things less than that. Is there, a 10 million, 5 million, are there other projects that exist that can achieve to the village standards, but may not be that deep tunnel project?
Yeah, I know I've told a number of people about the deep tunnel project, because that's, first to say, well, let's just route it through the ravines, we know the problem with that. Then there's this other thing, and I wanted to make sure my number was still right and hadn't drifted. Actually, it's
Only upward.
slightly less than that is what I had, something like 18 million, so it continues to be just out of the question. So that provides context for what you guys are looking at.
Can you bring back up that exhibit that shows some
Of
of
course.
the east side? Yeah. So if you look there in that study area too, some of the conversation related to that was to design if there's a pipe solution, can you pick up some of those other neighborhood,
Yep.
other sub-projects and capture that too, to have that kind of one big cure? Is there one pill, if you will, that could cure this problem? That could be part of it. But the idea is that it's, good news, bad news is that the IDOT is looking at what to do with their pipe that's under the viaduct today. And because it's getting towards the end of its useful life, and they're gonna actually do a repair project this summer, I believe, and do a section of it. But it's at least a century old. And they've looked at, and help me out here, Jeff, but I think that their current standard there for that pipe is not even close to their current standards either, right? It's off by half a century or more. So the idea is that they would looked at doubling the size of the pipe, and that doesn't get them close to that, to
Right.
their current standard either. So they know what the village is looking at, like, is there a pipe solution that we can do jointly perhaps, that cures their infrastructure concerns with ours? So that's part of the conversations with IDOT that they're looking at.
Right.
That is the original pipe, which dates to about 1902. So
Okay.
it's even more than a century.
Yeah.
I've also heard sentiment, everybody understands, we could throw 20 million at this so that once a year we don't have a day where we've got to go around.
Yeah.
And people say, well, it's not really worth that. However, are there other negative ramifications to that flooding occurring once a year or whatever, beyond just inconveniencing commuters, like damage to infrastructure or anything like that? Or is it just really the delay in commuting that we have to worry most about?
I mean, I think that has come up, also public safety response has come up, but there's other,
Okay, right.
there's
Yeah, right. So,
there are some other bridges, if you will, for that. There's an emergency crossing for
Yeah, up on
at Blodgett, and, but you're right, Eric, that's come up from time to time, and even with, if you remember, the other large stormwater project that was talked about for decades was the big bathtub project out,
right.
that would potentially help other communities downstream from us in the Skokie Ditch area. The Army Corps, when they looked at that project, they did pretty similar to what you're describing, like an economic impact analysis, like, with all the commerce that goes on, is this worth
Yep.
spending these
Investment.
large funds? And their answer was no.
Yep.
So that has come up from time to time, and I think even very loosely, part of the conversation is, well, what about a crossing at Blodgett? There's an alternative way to, could you,
Yeah.
well, it would take an act of Congress to create a new crossing, and most people would not be interested in entertaining that idea, but that's another alternative.
And I think my guess is commuting inconvenience is a much more easier thing to take than water going into homes
Yeah.
and actually causing damage.
Is it my understanding, and I could be wrong, that to replace this pipe, which is 125 years old or whatever, that you would have to then, because it right now traverses all the way down to Blodgett, and then all the way down to the lake? Isn't that how it goes?
The pipe daylights in the Ravine Park area.
Okay, but
That's
that's
where-
right, right down
Yeah.
there. So to replace it, there was the talk that you would also then have to dig up all of the infrastructure, everything
Oh,
there,
above it.
all the way above it, all the way up and then.
If I remember, also a couple of homes as well.
Yeah, that was the park.
I think that it's been rumored that there's homes over that pipe, and I presume that they would abandon the pipe in place, but,
That would be my guess too,
yeah.
yeah.
I don't know if they've gotten that far in terms of method and means and how they would do, if it was to be done that way. But
But
they're,
it would be a huge,
Yeah.
whatever.
Could
It
be,
would be,
could
it
be.
could potentially be an absolutely huge project. for
And
us.
again, just routing more water to ravines causes more erosion, and we have houses that could be affected by that.
Absolutely.
So that's not an option.
and so to the earlier, yes, exactly, and to the point where they said if they investigated doubling the pipe size, I mean,
Yeah,
it'd be
right.
like the amount of scouring that would come from that would not probably be acceptable to most people.
Yep. We'll have to have a sesquicentennial for the pipe.
That'd be our gift.
Eric, to your point, though, you mentioned an inconvenience once a year, but it does seem at least in my mind, having lived here for many years, that it is becoming more than once a year. You know,
We've
I
had a
don't, I
couple
don't
double,
remember, you know,
yeah.
growing up here, it might have been once a year, and now it seems like it's 2, 3, sometimes more than that. So if that trend does continue, then it may be more than just a minor inconvenience for a day.
Yeah.
Do we think that trend is based on increased rainfall, or do we think it's less permeable land? There's like two things at play there. That's, because I've noticed, just having lived here 7 years, right, or 8 years, that there's more flooding under the viaduct. And I can't tell if it's actually we're just getting more rain, or there's just less places for the rain to go.
Well, you know, when that pipe was put in, that was all farmland. That was all farmland up until after pretty much after, the terraces north, east, and west were not developed until the very late 50s, early 60s. So that was all farmland, and now, you know, so it's been pretty built up, that land, pretty much, you know, since I would certainly say 1970. You know, so the frequency of the rain, I don't know whether it's climate change, whatever is part of it, I don't know. But in terms of, there's been more saturation of the land, not probably a lot since 1970 development.
The shift in the definition of 10-year and 100-year events, aren't they looking at the frequency and intensity of storms to help make that determination?
Yeah, it's a whole statistical analysis that the Illinois State Water Survey has been working on. I believe the last update to rainfall depths that we use now was like 1989. So it's been 30 years since the last rainfall update. So they're actually using data up through, I don't even know if the July event was actually included in the analysis, the July 2017 event, or if it's the data that they used stopped right before that. But they are using real rainfall data and gauge data from the networks throughout the state to determine the frequency and the shift that's been going on with that.
Scott, do you have historical data for the viaduct flooding,
We do not.
as far as frequency? Drew, do we have that?
We have some of it.
Just
Yeah.
to see if it's just an anecdotal trend or if it actually is something that is reality.
I do recall, I think we looked at that when we first did this study. I think we have some history of that. I forget how far back it goes with reliability, but we have some of it.
And I do know, we've got a couple pictures from the 30s that show it up basically at the level of the trestle there.
Sure.
Drew, a couple questions. With respect to this $20 million, shall we say, deep tunnel potential project, what are the possibilities, if that were to be considered in some way, for that expense to be covered by state or federal funding?
We haven't gotten that far, and that goes back to, I'm trying to remember, was it 3 years ago or 4 years ago when they had those alternative studies presented, because there was a potential to have a detention basin there as well.
Yeah.
That was one of the alternatives when, I think, was that a $5 million or $2 million project? And that went up to a 5-year event. Maybe that's what it was.
Right, it was trying to just kind of clip off the, I guess you could say the peak for some of the more frequent storm events by creating some sort of a storage basin within the IDOT property. But for the storm events that, caused the major shutdown, it wasn't going to do anything.
And we took that project and we went and talked to IDOT about cost participation. And there's not to say there's not grants out there, that it just hasn't been explored to the greatest extent, because I think what we're hoping to do as part of the completion of the study is have more of a detailed continuum of choices that could be available for the village to do in terms of offering solutions. Maybe there's 6 projects that can be better defined, and maybe it's a combination of project A and project C, and do other things and then you could package it and go out and try to shop it for federal and or state dollars. But I think those possibilities exist.
And then another question, that particular project to which we have referred, what relief, if any at all, does it bring to houses?
Again, it would depend on the ancillary projects that we could connect into that same piping system, have trunk systems that would feed into it from other areas. So it would be as, the geography of it, if I remember, it was going to go down North Avenue.
That was the original alignment, yeah.
Yeah, so that you could pick up again like study area 3 and maybe even study areas 4 and 5, just where you can tie in. It did offer solutions to cure, or at least have, to improve a number of properties to get to that, the 100-year standard and keep water from infiltrating the homes.
And then another question, at least somewhere I heard that at some point or another, Jawa has to do another feed pipe. Is there any coordination if that were to happen with a big rip-up of one street or another, any coordination of that being a possibility to incorporate into the solution here?
Yeah,
Jawa is talking about doing, excuse me, another straw into the lake. But I don't think at this time we're talking about running a new pipe down Blodgett. Their second inlet to the lake would be just from their pump station to the lake. They might want to do a redundant line beneath the railroad tracks at the end of Blodgett, just for reliability purposes, if they have a problem with their pipe. But right now, they're not looking at a whole new pipe down Blodgett.
but obviously we look for any partner we can find, right?
Yeah, well, I'm also thinking about, you know, the opportunities to one and done, shall
Yep,
we say?
right, yeah, minimize disturbance.
Yeah, and maximize or minimize the expense.
Right.
Dig it once.
Any other questions?
I was just wondering, I know you said the study will be done in September this year, but the timeline for the Lincoln Avenue and the West Sheridan, those two that you kind of highlighted, the two projects you highlighted?
Yeah.
Do we have any kind of a timeline on those, when they might start?
These
or-
two right here?
I think if you go forward. Yeah,
Yeah,
The two-
this project and the Lincoln and the Sheridan.
yes.
That's Jeff.
I've been kind of involved with those. Jeff has probably more of an understanding of what's going on.
Those two projects are under contract. The first day they were allowed to work was today. We put them off to after the 4th of July. We'll probably see them start on West Sheridan in the next week or two.
Okay.
Lincoln, we're still waiting for an IDOT permit, which we expect soon to get that project kicked off. First thing you'll see is some tree removal,
Okay.
and then they'll get moving.
Thanks.
And those I think they said that the contract, we had a pre-construction meeting, they said they would need every bit of the contract period.
Which I believe is into September. But those will be done this summer and early fall. Those projects will be completed.
Thank you, Jeff. Any other comments or questions for anybody?
So, this was part 1 of 2 in this great series on stormwater in the village. We wanted to have it at this meeting, one, because it's televised, and somebody, if they wanted to review it later, somebody could do it versus doing it at a committee of the whole meeting. But also, we kind of purposely put it around a very short agenda so that we can spend most of the time having this conversation. So do appreciate Scott coming and sharing. We'll see more of him.
Yeah, thank you. We appreciate this. Thank you very much. All right. Do you have anything else on the village administrator's report this
No,
evening?
ma'am.
No, okay. Village attorney's report.
No report tonight.
No report. Why am I not surprised? Village president's report. We had an absolutely fabulous 4th of July parade. The weather was great. It really helped a lot. Not quite sure how many thousands came, but they did come in thousands. And great time was had by all. I don't think there were any major incidents or anything else for the thousands of people that were here and having a good time. So we appreciate all of the volunteers, the hard work that puts together, because basically they're now already starting for next year's. It just, one goes and it starts over again. So much appreciation to everybody for this, and kudos. Just another thing is, most people have sort of heard what's going on, is that we heard this week, much to our surprise, to be totally honest, that $63 million is going to be allocated for the 41-176 exchange. We have completed phase 1. That was done, 2 years ago, 3 years ago? Somewhere around that thing. And that was more for the design of what it would look like. Phase 2 will be taking place. We're not sure when. They said this is a high priority. However, they do have at least one other major priority, which is Route 80. Which I
I-80
think,
corridor,
yeah, which I think is an even bigger project than this one. But it is a priority for the administration, so timelines, we guess with?
Phase two, speaking with IDOT, the phase two, which would be the land acquisition and the construction drawing development, would take approximately 3 years. I think that same was said, that original timeframe was given for phase one, which took considerably longer than that. But it's possible that it can be completed in 3 years, and then that would go phase three, which would be actual construction would follow. Again, all this assumes funding and
And they will have to obtain some properties that are still in private ownership right now and different things of that type. This is a state project. It is not a village project. The money doesn't come into the village coffers to be expended. This is, so, I think you used the phrase, we hope to be at the table, but we're not sure if we are sitting with the adults, or as you said,
The
at the
kiddie
kiddie table. Right.
Question
This
is really what we're having to eat.
So,
well, I think we know what we're having to eat. Could you bring that up, Jeff? We can talk about what's going to be served. It's really, I could describe it as an amplification of what exists today in terms of the intersection. So for those very familiar, most people are familiar with what's out there, what will be supplemented will be the acceleration and deceleration.
deceleration ramps.
Accel and decel lanes, which is the common refrain, is that I almost got hit trying to slow down to turn, or I was trying to speed up and I almost got nailed by somebody coming on. But
That's why that horsepower works.
I just don't go that way.
So the other, there will be other stormwater improvements. There has been a number of projects, aspects of this interchange that have been peeled off to advance a little faster, which all this may come to a head and get caught up. But there's a project that's pending, which is to redo the pump that's under that interchange right now and relocate it out from underneath. And put in a pump house in the northeast quadrant of the intersection. And then where the existing, I'll call it the former Knollwood Fire Department is, and there's a small office building to the south of it, that will be a stormwater basin there as part of this redesign. But from the village's perspective, and the next steps that will involve this board will be, the village will have to enter into a letter of intent with the Illinois Department of Transportation about what we expect for the improvements along that corridor. The agreement will outline what the village would have cost participation with for projects like this. It would be additional lighting, additional path improvements, landscaping, I'll call ancillary improvements associated with this. Again, we don't know the entire scope or scale of the project, but we do believe it would, based off the number that's included, it would most likely include improvements at Waukegan 176 that are related to the design or reworking, right, Jeff?
Yeah, it would be a complete reconstruction of this intersection here of Waukegan 176, 41, 176, rebuilding 41 through here. They actually want to lower the road to get a little more clearance under the bridge at Highway 41, which might impact our water main, but that's a problem for another time. Eliminating all direct access here from these businesses to 41, building a new frontage road basically back up by the railroad tracks. And by doing that, they can put the acceleration lanes, so you can now enter the highway without praying first, not knowing what's coming at 80 miles an hour underneath this bridge. And then it kind of extends up here to about where the Skokie River crosses on 176. So it's a massive project, and actually there'll be a center median down 176. So if you are going eastbound and you want to access some of the businesses on the north side, you'll make a U-turn at a cut and then turn around and go make a right turn. And they don't want left turns into those businesses due to accidents and the safety history of the area.
Jeff, would you circle the signals where if you remember there, yeah, right there in front of Canals and also at the Target development, those the biggest conversation going back to phase one was whether or not to have roundabouts there. If you remember that.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the truth of the matter was that was the preferred design by the stakeholder group that was part of it, but at the end of the day, IDOT, for safety reasons, given the proximity of the eastern intersection close to the railroad tracks, they were concerned about cars stacking there, or for those that may have a lack of familiarity with managing roundabouts, where they were concerned about that, so they wanted to go with the traditional signal. The eastern widening that takes place does taper essentially right in front of Public Works, and it goes down to 2 lanes through 176 moving eastward. But I think 176 to 43 would remain about the same width it is today, right, Jeff?
Yes,
Yeah.
because that middle left, right turn lane becomes more of a median.
So it looks like this may be, I mean, for the longest time, we said it would not be within our lifetime. I think that's, should we worry? But it looks like it's going to happen, so that's good news.
Yeah, and there will be some disruptions.
So,
Some, yes,
Minor.
quite a few.
So.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have any questions to Jeff or anybody else on this?
I was just curious if there's ever been any talk on that, where the rail, and this is a little off the subject of the 41, but that railroad line that comes through, you know, when a train comes through and we get backed up, way backed up, way backed up, if there's ever been any talk of doing a viaduct under there and having the road come over so that or go under so that it.
Yeah, and I
you know, the
believe that was
flow.
looked at as part of the phase 1, with 176 already going over 41. You know, logically, you think the rail would have to go down as well, that, you know, and follow 41, but the amount of miles you'd have to go back to get that grade to go down essentially
great.
20 feet and come back up, it's just too much. I mean,
Okay.
the cost would be closer to the I-80 project if that was a part of this.
Better
Okay.
for an overpass over the train.
And then you'd have, yeah, and even that, I mean, with the way we are fixed right now with 41 under 176, that's hard to do as well.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, anything else? Thank you, Jeff. Thank you. Okay, that's that. All right, let's go back to the acceptance of correspondence. All correspondence was delivered to the Village Board of Trustees in the informational report on June 21st and 28th.
That's all part of the consent.
That's all part of the consent, yes, excuse me. And that also includes the second reading of an ordinance approving a final plat of subdivision and variations from the zoning regulations for 454 Simpson Avenue, 617 Prospect Avenue, and also the second reading of an ordinance granting a variation from the village's parking setback regulations, denying a variation from the village's frontage yard regulation, and approving a site plan at 101 Waukegan. Do I have a motion to accept the consent agenda?
So moved.
To approve.
Move to approve, excuse me.
So moved to approve.
Mr. Meyer?
So move to approve, thank you, Mr. Meyer. Do I have a second to so move to approve?
Second.
Okay, second, all right, by Ms. Markey, I guess. All in
You
favor?
need a roll call.
Roll call, please, that's right. It's not-
Trustee Markey.
Aye.
Trustee Meyer.
Aye.
Trustee Toll.
Aye.
Trustee Grenier.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. We now have other business, which is, if we laugh, I'm gonna cough tonight, which is an ordinance amending Title III of the Village of Lake Bluff's Municipal Code concerning liquor licenses for tastings. This is a first reading approval of the ordinance, which would be a voice vote. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
So moved, and that was Mr. Grenier for tasting, and could I have a second, please?
Second.
Second by Mr. Meyer. In May, the Village Board passed Ordinance 2019-14, which, among other changes, created a new type of liquor license to allow Terlato Wines International, a locally headquartered wine importer and broker, to conduct tastings as part of the 2019 Downtown Block Party Series. After the ordinance passed, Terlato has instead expressed a preference for the village's existing liquor licenses to be conducting tastings of their products, so others would be utilizing that for their tastings. The attached ordinance would allow on-premise tastings at the brewery, which sells Terlato's product, as well as tastings incidental to a Class AA civic event permit. Any questions from any of the trustees regarding this?
Is there any particular reason why we can't just be done with this tonight and waive the second reading?
No?
Anybody have a problem with that?
No objection.
No objection, okay, so to make this- we need voice vote on first reading and the second. Okay, so we will do first reading approval, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, we now have a motion to waive first reading and allow this at second reading.
So moved by me.
I'll
So
second.
And second,
Mr.
excuse me, Mr. Toll. All righty, and this is again voice vote.
Roll call.
Roll call.
Trustee Meyer.
Aye.
Trustee Toll.
Aye.
Trustee Grenier.
Aye.
Trustee Markey.
Aye.
Okay. All righty, trustees report. Any trustees wish to weigh in on the heavy matters of the village?
I'll have one quick comment. This was the first parade that I've experienced living on the other side of town. And I was going to say just how remarkably well organized it was for the number of cars that are parked on the west side of town. I had no idea. Because we've always walked the parade from the other side, and, but it was well organized, and the residents who are out there tolerate quite a lot that day, and I appreciate it a lot. That's my comment.
Okay. Anyone
And I
else?
would like to recognize the Public Works. Jake and his crew did a really great job cleaning up afterwards. I think just within the hour after the parade, you could have,
Yeah.
other than for the chairs and the parties still going on, it didn't look like much had gone through, at least on the streets.
No, the minute that the fire trucks have gone, they start. And they're out there, and it's highly organized. Also, much kudos to our police department and other officers who were there for the day for keeping it very safe. And so they were very diligent, going up and down, making sure the kids were on the side, were out of danger, because they're all attracted by, of course, the goodies. And I will have to say, I think the parade committee did a great job in instructing the parade people and the parade to please walk over to the kids and stuff. So I didn't see any throwing or anything which, could cause accidents. So really, great job by everybody. Thank you all.
So we have a procedural. On the second reading, it requires 2/3 of the Board of Trustees, and since we're missing 2 trustees, we need a vote of 5, so the village president is required to vote on that.
Okay, I am.
This goes
All
back to
right, so
consent
this is
agenda
the second.
items.
We'll go back to that one. I should have said the,
What's that?
Consent agenda item as well?
No, because those were just, we waived second reading on
I see.
in the liquor code, which requires the 2/3 vote of
Okay.
of the board, not just trustees.
okay, so
President O'Hare.
aye. Okay. All righty, do we have a motion to go into executive session to discuss
Personnel.
personnel this night?
So moved.
So moved, thank you, Ms. Markey, and do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Grenier, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. And we will now go in executive session. Thank you all for coming.